Hello, we welcome you to today's Bible study of the Banking Blessings Ministry. Today we are going to look at an event that happened in the life of David, in which his son Absalom organized recognition for himself and tried to take over, tried to drive David out of power so that he could become king by force. Almost like a military coup. We will learn how David responded to this, because this was a big crisis in his family, in his kingdom. And through the things he did, we will learn a few things about how to respond to an adversity. We will also learn how Absalom built up recognition and support among Israeli men. He spent a lengthy time, a period of about 4 years, shaking hands and making himself known to the people, popular among the people. And after the period of 4 years, he had stolen the hearts of Israeli men. And he moved to Hebron, declared himself king, and drove David, his father, out of Jerusalem. Even though he did this for the wrong reason, but we will look closely at how he built up his reputation, because this is important and this is something that we often need to do in our life. Everything we will learn is in 2 Samuel chapters 15 through 16. We will begin with Absalom cultivating support. He was one of the princes. David had a number of sons. Somehow Absalom wanted to build himself up to become the successor to David. As we will find later on, in fact, he didn't wait to succeed. He decided to drive David out and make himself king. But how he built himself up is very interesting. First of all, he got himself a chariot to look like, he wanted himself to look like a king. He got himself a chariot with horses to drive the chariot, and he got 50 men to run in front of him. So he made himself look like king, but that wasn't it. Every morning he would go out to the city gate leading to the palace city, and people that are passing by, he will greet them. People that are going towards the palace to bring a case to David, he will ask them what the case was about. They will talk to him and he will tell them, oh, they have a good case, but the unfortunate thing is they don't have a king's representative to hear their case. That if he was made chief, if he was made the judge among them, that he will give justice to everybody that is aggrieved. So he kept doing this. That's gradually building up support. If people wanted to shake his hand, he will stretch and kiss them and make them feel comfortable with him. And he did this consistently, every day for a period of 4 years. And during this time, of course, he succeeded in stealing the hearts of Israeli men, because every one of them thought of him as the next king, and in fact they couldn't wait for the king to leave, to vacate, so that Absalom could become their king. Let us read about this in 2 Samuel chapter 15, verses 1 to 7. 2 Samuel chapter 15, NIV version. In the course of time, Absalom provided himself with a chariot and horses, and with 50 men to run ahead of him. He would get up early and stand by the side of the road leading to the city gate. Whenever anyone came with a complaint to be placed before the king for a decision, Absalom would call out to him, "What town are you from?" He would answer, "Your servant is from one of the tribes of Israel." Then Absalom would say to him, "Look, your claims are valid and proper, but there is no representative of the king to hear you." And Absalom would add, if only I were appointed judge in the land, then everyone who has a complaint or case could come to me, and I would see that he gets justice. Also, whenever anyone approached him to bow down before him, Absalom would reach out his hand, take hold of him, and kiss him. Absalom behaved in this way toward all the Israelites who came to the king asking for justice. And so he stole the hearts of all the men of Israel. At the end of 4 years, Absalom said to the king, "Let me go to Hebron and fulfill a vow I made to the Lord." So Absalom, he made himself look like a king. Every morning he would come out and greet people, shake their hands, talk to them, make them comfortable, make them happy. And after 4 years, he succeeded, because they loved him so much, they were ready to do whatever he wanted. Let us look at this a little more closely, because what Absalom did, even though he did it for the wrong reason, actually teaches a lesson about building up support, about building up membership, about building up reputation, about building up a product. That there are two periods. There is the period of cultivation, borrowing from farming. There is the period of cultivation, and then there is the harvest. In order to expect harvest, you have to cultivate. And what Absalom did was cultivate painstakingly. Cultivation involves you prepare the land, sow the seeds, and then tend the plant as they grow. If you just prepare the land and sow the seeds, and quickly you start looking for results, you get nothing and you'll be disappointed. And if you sow the seeds and you don't stay and tend the plants as they grow, you will be disappointed. So it takes a lot of effort to cultivate support. You have to build up, you have to make friends with people, you have to present your product to them, you have to present your ideas to them. You don't try to put anybody down like Absalom was putting his father down, because he was doing so for the wrong reason. But when you are trying to build up support for something, you are trying to build up reputation as somebody that does something, it takes doing it consistently over a period of time before you can begin to expect your product. There was a preacher we had at church one day that talked about this cultivation, and he told us that he makes wine. He plants grapes, and then from these grapes he makes wine. And he told us that it will take him, from the time he plants a grape seed, that it takes him 7 years before he can get a bottle of wine out of that grape. And these are not 7 years where you just sit and wait. It is 7 years of doing different things. I don't know what it takes to make wine. But it's 7 years of tending the plant, maybe harvesting it and doing the wine and waiting for it to mature and all sorts of things. But that's what it takes. Building up anything requires the period of cultivation during which you must do a good work before you can expect harvest. And don't expect instant gratification. If Absalom on the first day expected people to begin to call him king, he would have failed. But he shook hands and didn't quite tell them what he wanted, but kept putting himself up as somebody that could be a good king to them. And he did this consistently for 4 years. And the result is he stole their hearts. They loved him so much, they would not wait for his father to finish ruling. They wanted him in as soon as possible. So the first thing Absalom did after the 4 years was he convinced his father to let him move to Hebron. Now, Hebron was where his father started as king. He ruled Judah from Hebron until the whole of Israel made him king, and then he moved from Hebron to Jerusalem. So there is a structure. At this time, there was a structure in Hebron that was fit for a king, the seat of a king's government. So Absalom wanted to move there. He didn't want to fight his father from Jerusalem. He wanted to make himself king first. But he didn't tell his father that. He just said he needed to move to Hebron because he promised God that he would worship from Hebron. Let us read about this in 2 Samuel 15, verses 7 through 9. At the end of 4 years, Absalom said to the king, "Let me go to Hebron and fulfill a vow I made to the Lord. While your servant was living at Geshur in Aram, I made this vow. If the Lord takes me back to Jerusalem, I will worship the Lord in Hebron." The king said to him, "Go in peace." So he went to Hebron. Well, as soon as he got to Hebron, he sent secret messages around and told people that somebody is going to blow the trumpet, and that when the trumpet sounds, that they should all shout that Absalom was king in Hebron. Essentially, he declared himself king. When he was going to Hebron, he took 200 men that didn't really know why they were going. They thought they were invited to some kind of gathering or something. It turned out that they were invited to come and become the tools of a rebellion. Then he took his father's advisor, Ahithophel, invited him from his home to come and join him in Hebron. And Ahithophel, being a highly placed advisor, very close advisor to David, his arrival in Hebron to work with Absalom gave Absalom's rebellion a measure of credibility. So let us read about this in 2 Samuel chapter 15, verses 10 to 12. Then Absalom sent secret messengers throughout the tribes of Israel to say, "As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpets, then say, Absalom is king in Hebron." 200 men from Jerusalem had accompanied Absalom. They had been invited as guests and went quite innocently, knowing nothing about the matter. While Absalom was offering sacrifices, he also sent for Ahithophel the Gilonite, David's counselor, to come from Gilo, his hometown. And so the conspiracy gained strength, and Absalom's following kept on increasing. Well, David got to know about this, but by the time he realized what was happening, it was too late. Somebody came and told him that, look, all the men of Israel supported Absalom, which was telling David, well, you don't have support in the land. So David realized that it was too late for him to do anything from Jerusalem. He felt that he needed to save himself first and his people, the people that were still loyal to him. So he told them to gather all their things and let them move out of Jerusalem quickly, because if Absalom and his men were to catch up with them, that he would kill them and put the city to the sword, as he put it. So he gathered his household, he gathered his officials, he gathered all the men loyal to him, and they left Jerusalem. They ran out of Jerusalem. He left 10 concubines, 10 of his women, to care for the palace. He didn't really know what was going to happen. He didn't know the future, but he knew he needed to get away from Absalom and his supporters, because they were not playing games. Let us read about this in 2 Samuel chapter 15, verses 13 to 23. A messenger came and told David, "The hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom." Then David said to all his officials who were with him in Jerusalem, "Come, we must flee, or none of us will escape from Absalom. We must leave immediately, or he will move quickly to overtake us and bring ruin upon us and put the city to the sword." The king's officials answered him, "Your servants are ready to do whatever our lord the king chooses." The king set out with his entire household following him, but he left 10 concubines to take care of the palace. So the king set out with all the people following him, and they halted at a place some distance away. All his men marched past him, along with all the Kerethites and Peletites, and all the 600 Gittites who had accompanied him from Gath marched before the king. The king said to Ittai the Gittite, "Why should you come along with us? Go back and stay with King Absalom. You are a foreigner, an exile from your homeland. You came only yesterday, and today shall I make you wander about with us when I do not know where I am going? Go back and take your countrymen. May kindness and faithfulness be with you." But Ittai replied to the king, "As surely as the Lord lives, and as my lord the king lives, wherever my lord the king may be, whether it means life or death, there will your servant be." David said to Ittai, "Go ahead, march on." So Ittai the Gittite marched on with all his men and the families that were with him. The whole countryside wept aloud as all the people passed by. The king also crossed the Kidron Valley, and all the people moved on toward the desert. So this was quite a scene, a king leaving, running away from his palace. The people that loved him and didn't really know what was going on, but knew that he was running away. They wept. They didn't like it. They were not happy about it at all. But meanwhile, his son was in Hebron. He had the support of a majority of Israeli men. They said all Israeli men. He had their support, so there was not much the rest of the people could do. But as David was living, he was also thinking about the future. He was now in a crisis, and he needed to think quickly and start preparing to confront the crisis. And this is one of the things we learned. And he quickly started thinking of, first he needs people that will provide him information about what is going on, what will be going on. So he advised two priests, Zadok and Abiathar, that these people were taking care of the ark of God. They had brought it and made sacrifices as the people were passing. So when every person had left Jerusalem, all the David supporters that were leaving, David had advised them and said, "Look, return to Jerusalem with the ark of God, and take your 2 sons with you." They had 2 grown sons. And he told them that their task in Jerusalem will be to gather information from within Absalom's side to be able to tell him what was going on. Let us read about this in 2 Samuel chapter 15, verses 24 to 29. Zadok was there too, and all the Levites who were with him were carrying the ark of the covenant of God. They set down the ark of God, and Abiathar offered sacrifices until all the people had finished leaving the city. Then the king said to Zadok, "Take the ark of God back into the city. If I find favor in the Lord's eyes, he will bring me back and let me see it and his dwelling place again. But if he says, I'm not pleased with you, then I'm ready. Let him do to me whatever seems good to him. The king also said to Zadok the priest, aren't you a seer? Go back to the city in peace with your son Ahimaaz and Jonathan son of Abiathar. You and Abiathar, take your 2 sons with you. I will wait at the fords in the desert until word comes from you to inform me. So Zadok and Abiathar took the ark of God back to Jerusalem and stayed there. Well, next, David met a man called Hushai. Hushai was an advisor like Ahithophel. And Hushai looked really unhappy. He had his clothes torn. He had dust on his head and all that. And David looked at him and said, Hushai, if you come with me, you will become a burden to me. But if you go back to Jerusalem, you could accomplish something for me. So he sent Hushai, said, look, go back to Jerusalem. When you get there, declare loyalty to Absalom and serve as his advisor, because Hushai was a qualified advisor. And his job, he had 2 jobs. The first was to frustrate Ahithophel's advice. Ahithophel, David's advisor, had gone with Absalom. And David knew that he was a good advisor. And if left alone, maybe he would give the right advice to Absalom. So he told Hushai that his first assignment was to give alternative advice, to frustrate Ahithophel's advice. So this is high-level spy work we're talking about. Then his second task was to feed information to the priests Zadok and Abiathar. He said Zadok and Abiathar will be there, and they have 2 sons there through whom you can send messages. So you see that David was deliberately planting spies on Absalom's side. Even before anything started, he knew there was a problem. He knew he's going to have to do something. But to do something, he needed to know what was going on the other side. So he planted these people to provide him information. Let's read about this in 2 Samuel chapter 15, verses 32 to 37. When David arrived at the summit where people used to worship God, Hushai the Archite was there to meet him, his robe torn and dust on his head. David said to him, if you go with me, you will be a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, I will be your servant, O king. I was your father's servant in the past, but now I will be your servant. Then you can help me by frustrating Ahithophel's advice. Won't the priests Zadok and Abiathar be there with you? Tell them anything you hear in the king's palace. Their 2 sons, Ahimaaz son of Zadok and Jonathan son of Abiathar, are there with them. Send them to me with anything you hear. So David's friend Hushai arrived at Jerusalem as Absalom was entering the city. Well, let us look at David's actions in more detail. We've seen how he appointed spies, sent them into the Absalom side, but he was sad. He was saddened by the rebellion. He wept openly. He prayed against Ahithophel. He said Ahithophel, he prayed to God, said, turn Ahithophel's advice into foolishness. So he was really concerned about Ahithophel's advice to Absalom. Let us read about this in 2 Samuel chapter 15, verses 30 and 31. But David continued up the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went. His head was covered and he was barefoot. All the people with him covered their heads too, and were weeping as they went up. Now David had been told Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. So David prayed, "O Lord, turn Ahithophel's counsel into foolishness." Well, what did David do to confront the crisis? What else did he do? We saw he started getting ready for future things by planting people to provide him information. But you remember, David is somebody that worships God a lot, relies on God, and always resigned to God's will. So in this case, he made it very clear that he was resigned to God's will and that he would accept whatever God gave him. That he will stay, he will return, or stay out, depending on what God wanted. Let us read about this, 2 Samuel 15, 25 to 26. Then the king said to Zadok, "Take the ark of God back into the city. If I find favor in the Lord's eyes, he will bring me back and let me see it and his dwelling place again. But if he says, I'm not pleased with you, then I am ready. Let him do to me whatever seems good to him." This is very important. He resigned to the will of God. And this has to come from your heart. It's not just lip service. When you resign to the will of God, it's really you are prepared to accept whatever he gives. But as we can see, that's not all. You also should use the know-how, the capabilities, the knowledge that God has given you, because he gave you those things so that you can use them. In this case, yes, David was resigned to the will of God, but as we can see, he has already planted people to provide him information so that he will know what is going on and prepare for whatever he needs to do. So it's not just a matter of praying, it's not just a matter of having faith. You have to have faith, but you should also work. Do the work that is required to make things happen. Resign to the will of God, but make your human effort, because that's what God has created you to do. You have to make effort. You have to do things. You have to try to do things and then pray as you do things. Pray for God to direct you to the right things to do. You cannot just sit down and say, I've resigned to the will of God, so let him do what he likes. That is, he will do what he likes, but he has created you to take actions. And if you fail to take these actions, then things will be different. But if you take those actions, then he will help you as you go along. Of course, you have to evaluate every action you contemplate. Ask yourself, how does this take me closer to the will of God? How does this convey the image of God to the people that will be affected? Because taking action, if you start doing reckless things that are ungodly, then that's not really what you're supposed to do. So in this case, David is resigned to the will of God. He has sent in spies to get information, and let's see what happened next. Well, he met a sympathizer. On his way, he met a sympathizer called Ziba. Ziba was the steward of Mephibosheth. We remember in previous studies that Mephibosheth was the son of Jonathan, David's friend. After David became king of Israel, he wanted to do something good for Jonathan and found out that his son was still alive, though crippled. So he brought him to the palace restored to him everything that his grandfather Saul had, and then promised him that he will always eat at his table. He will be one of the guests at the dinner table with the king. Then he told Ziba to take care of Mephibosheth. And this was all in Jerusalem. Now that he was running away from Jerusalem, Mephibosheth stayed back, but Ziba left and met the king. And while he was coming, he brought food and drink and brought several things for David and his people. And then he declared loyalty to David. Let's read about the details in 2 Samuel chapter 16, verses 1 through 4. When David had gone a short distance beyond the summit, there was Ziba, the steward of Mephibosheth, waiting to meet him. He had a string of donkeys saddled and loaded with 200 loaves of bread, 100 cakes of raisin, 100 cakes of figs, and a skin of wine. The king asked Ziba, "Why have you brought these?" Ziba answered, "The donkeys are for the king's household to ride on. The bread and fruit are for the men to eat, and the wine is to refresh those who become exhausted in the desert." The king then asked, "Where is your master's grandson?" Ziba said to him, "He is staying in Jerusalem because he thinks, 'Today the house of Israel will give me back my grandfather's kingdom.'" Then the king said to Ziba, "All that belonged to Mephibosheth is now yours." "I humbly bow," Ziba said. "May I find favor in your eyes, my lord the king." So Ziba declared loyalty to David. Then as they were going on, David had another encounter, this time with a Benjamite called Shimei. Remember, Saul was from Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin. So this man was from Saul's tribe, Shimei. And Shimei was really cursing David, throwing things at him, making fun of him and saying, "Look, you stole the kingdom from our man Saul, and now God has driven you out of Jerusalem and handed the kingdom over to your son." And he really insulted David. He said all sorts of things. Then David cautioned his men, because one of his men, Abishai, I think we'll read about this. Abishai was not happy with this man cursing David and insulting him, and he said, "Look, why don't I just go and take off this man's head? Why should he be cursing you like that?" And David cautioned him and said, "Look, leave the man alone, because maybe God sent him to curse me. Let him keep cursing. It's not going to harm us. It's not going to do anything to us." And he used the opportunity to pray to God for sympathy and said, "Look, maybe God will have sympathy on me for all this distress I'm going through, and then grant me pardon." This is in 2 Samuel chapter 16, verses 5 to 13. It's a very long section. We're not going to read the whole thing, but we'll read verses 11 to 13 that sort of summarize the essential action here. So David then said to Abishai and all his officials, "My son, who is of my own flesh, is trying to take my life. How much more then this Benjamite? Leave him alone, let him curse, for the Lord has told him to. It may be that the Lord will see my distress and repay me with good for the cursing I'm receiving today." So David and his men continued along the road, while Shimei was going along the hillside opposite him, cursing as he went and throwing stones at him and showering him with dirt. Well, since David left Jerusalem, the next thing that happened was Absalom moved in and took Jerusalem. He occupied Jerusalem. When he settled down at the king's palace, Hushai, the second spy that David sent, declared loyalty to Absalom. Ahithophel advised Absalom to lie with the concubines his father left behind. We will read about this in the Bible, to declare enmity against his father David. Ahithophel felt, he said, that one way that Absalom could show people that he doesn't care about David anymore and that David doesn't care about him is to go and lie with his concubines, and then he will make himself a stench. He will demonstrate to people that he is so odious to David that he and David don't have anything in common again. Remember, David is his father. Let's read about this in 2 Samuel chapter 16, verses 15 to 23. Meanwhile, Absalom and all his men of Israel, all the men of Israel came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel was with him. Then Hushai the Archite, David's friend, went to Absalom and said to him, "Long live the king, long live the king." Absalom asked Hushai, "Is this the love you show your friend? Why didn't you go with your friend?" Hushai said to Absalom, "No, the one chosen by the Lord, by these people, and by all the men of Israel, his I will be, and I will remain with him. Furthermore, who should I serve? Should I not serve the son, just as I served your father? So I will serve you." Absalom said to Ahithophel, "Give us your advice. What should we do?" Ahithophel answered, "Lie with your father's concubines, whom he left to take care of the palace. Then all Israel will hear that you have made yourself a stench in your father's nostrils, and the hands of everyone with you will be strengthened." So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, and he lay with his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. Now, in those days, the advice Ahithophel gave was like that of one who inquires of God. That was how both David and Absalom regarded all of Ahithophel's advice. Well, so the rebellion has started, and the initial part of it has been successful to Absalom. He has occupied Jerusalem. His father ran off from Jerusalem. He had declared himself king, and he had the support of the men of Israel. So as far as he was concerned, it was successful, and he did this horrible thing of lying with his father's concubines to show that he didn't care about his father, so that those that supported him would not be concerned whether he would go and reconcile with his father one day. But let us recap what we learned, because the way that David responded to this adversity teaches us a number of things. The first thing he did was that he resigned to the will of God. He declared he will either return to Jerusalem or stay out, depending on what God decided for him to do. If God wanted him to return, that he would be very happy to return. And if God did not want him to return, then he would be happy to stay out. So that was the faith. That was an act of faith, that it's up to God, it is not up to him. But having resigned to God, you also have to be prepared to take action. So David was prepared to fight the adversity. The first thing he did was he planted people in Jerusalem. close to the seat of power and tasked them, gave each of them a separate task on how to gathering information. Hushai was supposed to compete in advising Absalom, and his intention was to frustrate Ahithophel's advice. Then he was supposed to feed information to Zadok and Abiathar through their sons. So while David resigned to God, he wasn't sitting idle. He was doing something to prepare to take action if he can. Well, the interaction between David and Shimei is very important because it talks about focusing on the main. When you are dealing with adversity, focus on the main thing. Don't start lashing out at little things. Don't start quarreling with anything you see, because what you do is you lose energy, you lose focus, and then you forget what it is you are really fighting. This comes very clear in his interaction. Shimei was the man that came cursing him, the Benjamite, that cursed David, threw stones at him, threw dirt at him, saying that he stole the kingdom from Saul and now he's paying for his crime. David ignored him. His people wanted to go and kill him. Now, if they had killed him, they would have sent a very bad message to people around David and say, hey, look, all that this man did was, curse him and all that. And he killed him. Then can anybody ever, disagree with the king and get away? So he didn't want to start a new problem for himself. And he didn't want to start a problem with something that really was a diversion. The real issue was Absalom that was sitting in the kingdom, in the palace in Jerusalem. This man that was cursing him, was doing the wrong thing, but going after him would have taken energy away. So he decided to stay focused on the real thing and leave this man alone. Then he said, well, maybe it was God that sent him to go and curse me. So let him do it, don't bother him. But what this teaches us is staying on focus. Remember what the issue is and focus on dealing with it. Don't allow little things. Typically what happens is when you're unhappy with something, you start lashing out at everything you see. Even people that may be your friends, people that may help you deal with it, deal with your problem, you just keep lashing out, keep, fighting whoever you see. And then before you know it, you don't know what you are fighting anymore. You are fighting everything. You don't have a focus. You are wasting your energy. You are wasting your intellectual resources. But if you were to focus on a problem, if you were to know what the problem is, the big picture, we call it at times, focus on it, pray about it, and ignore the little things that may come along, that the devil may throw at you to try to divert your attention. So that is a very important lesson we learn from this interaction between David and Shimei while David was dealing with the crisis brought about by Absalom's rebellion. Well, from Absalom himself, we learn about cultivation, harvest and cultivation. That's a very simple imagery to use, because to expect a harvest, you have to cultivate. The same way, to expect a good reputation, you have to build it up. And it's not done in a day. It's done through careful, consistent actions about on the things that you want to build reputation. If you want to build support among people, then you have to relate to them on a day-to-day basis, day in, day out, through the planting season, which it varies from case to case. What is the planting season? There is no definite, in the case of farming, there is a definite planting season. But when you are farming reputation, or you are farming support, or you are farming membership, it takes time. So you have to, the length of the farming season is not known. You have to work at it. One thing we know you need is you have to be consistent. You cannot do it a little and then you forget about it for a long time and then you come back. No, because you are trying, it is by building consistency that people begin to associate you with whatever it is that you want them to know about you. It's by doing it consistently. If you want to be somebody that people know, somebody that, you want to be known as somebody that solves problems, then every problem, every situation you run into, find out what the problem is and do something about it. And do this consistently so that people will get to know that that's what you do. And what is the harvest in that case? Well, when they really have a big problem, guess who they will look for? Is that person they know who solves problems, who has the reputation of solving problems. If you are somebody that dodges problems, finds a way to get out of the way, people are not going to look for you when a problem comes. And we call it problem, but these might be big opportunities. Every problem is an opportunity. They will not look for you if you are a dodger, but they will look for you if you have the reputation of solving problems that you encounter. So, although he did it for the wrong reason, Absalom teaches us here a very important lesson about cultivating support. It took him 4 years to steal the heart of Israeli men. 4 years is a long time, and he was every morning standing out there and shaking hands. He did this consistently for 4 years. So that is the end of today's Bible study. We thank those that will get an opportunity in the future and find time to watch the video or listen to the audio. We pray that what you hear will make a positive impact in your life and help you move closer to God's purpose for your life. Thank you, and God bless you.